He saw a painting. It showed a woman with calm eyes, soft features, and a serious face. He stared at it and smiled. This was her, his fourth wife. The painting was of Anne of Cleves. Henry sent a proposal. He didn't know her. He had never spoken to her. He only knew her face from a picture. He expected magic, but when they met, the dream shattered. Why? Because Henry thought she'd fall in love the moment she saw him, even in disguise. He thought she'd faint from joy, praise his face, call him strong and handsome. Instead, Anne didn't react at all. That's when Henry turned cold. He told his court she looked like a horse, that she smelled bad, that she was ugly. But was she? Or had she simply failed to play along with the king's ego? Before we go further, hit that subscribe button, because once you hear how a single portrait, a misunderstanding, and a bruised royal ego ruined a queen's future, you'll never look at history the same way again. This is the story of how a smart, quiet woman from Germany hurt Henry's pride and survived the most dangerous marriage in England.
Anne of Cleves wasn't raised like most royal girls in Europe. Her home, the Duchy of Cleves, was serious and strict. There were no fancy dances, no flirting at court, and no silly games to impress men. Girls were taught to work, not to charm. Anne's mother ran the household. She was firm, wise, and respected. The women in Anne's family had strong voices and real power. Anne learned how to manage servants, run a household, and entertain guests. She knew how to cook, sew, play music, and speak German. She also learned a little French. But one thing she didn't learn: how to flirt. She wasn't trained to giggle at a man's joke, or bat her eyelashes, or flatter a prince. She was taught to be serious, loyal, and useful. That's what made her valuable in Cleves. She grew up believing marriage was about partnership, not love or attraction. It was about duty. Anne was 24 when the marriage proposal from England arrived. That was late for a princess. Most noble girls were married off by 15 or 16, but Anne had been allowed to grow up. She had time to form her own ideas, her own opinions, and her own sense of self. King Henry VIII of England was searching for his fourth wife. He had divorced Catherine of Aragon, beheaded Anne Boleyn, and lost Jane Seymour after childbirth. Now he needed a new queen, quickly. His advisor suggested Anne of Cleves. She came from a powerful Protestant family, and Henry wanted an alliance with the German states, but he had never seen her. So he sent his famous painter, Hans Holbein, to Germany. "Paint her exactly as she is," Henry ordered. The result was a portrait of Anne with a calm, thoughtful expression. Her clothes were heavy and modest. She wore the traditional German headdress. Nothing in the painting was false. It showed Anne as she really was, dignified and plain. When Henry saw the painting, he liked what he saw. But what he truly wanted wasn't a wife. He wanted to be adored. He wanted a woman who would fall in love with him at first sight, who would look at him like he was still the young, handsome king he used to be. Anne had no idea that a portrait was about to pull her into one of history's most dangerous games.
Anne was nearly in London when Henry VIII decided to meet her, secretly. He wanted to surprise her with a romantic gesture. Dressed as a messenger, he entered her rooms in disguise. This was Henry's fantasy. The woman would recognize him instantly, run into his arms, and fall in love, just like a fairy tale. But when Anne saw him, she didn't react. She accepted the letter politely and stayed calm. She didn't know who he was. Why would she? He looked nothing like his portrait. Fatter, older, slower. Henry tried to kiss her. She pulled back, confused and uncomfortable. He left the room in silence. A short while later, Someone told Anne, that was the King of England. Anne was shocked. She quickly apologized. She said she didn't know and asked for forgiveness. She tried to be warm and respectful, but the damage was done. Henry was already furious. Outside the room, in front of his courtiers, he exploded. He said, "I like her not." He said she looked like a Flanders mare, a common horse. He told his men that she was dull, boring, nothing like her portrait. But none of this was Anne's fault. She had never been trained in English courtly love. In her homeland, women were raised to be modest and quiet. She acted with dignity. She apologized when told the truth. She tried to be kind. Still, Henry couldn't forgive her. Why? Because he expected her to act like he was still the young, handsome king from years ago. He wanted her to fall for him on sight, but he no longer looked like the man in his own mind. He had a bloated belly, a bandaged leg that oozed, and a sour smell from his infected wound. But in his head, he was still the romantic hero. Anne didn't play along, and that hurt his pride. From that day forward, he didn't see Anne as a bride. He saw her as a mistake. But with the wedding just days away, there was no easy way out. Treaties had been signed. War could break out if he backed out now. Henry was trapped, and Anne had no idea what she had walked into.
Anne entered London with a hopeful heart. She smiled at the crowds, bowed politely, and did everything a future queen was supposed to do. She thought her wedding would be the start of something beautiful. But behind the smiles, Henry was bitter and angry. He kept saying she looked nothing like her portrait. He told his advisors that her skin was loose, her body unpleasant, and, worst of all, that she smelled bad. He said she smelled like evil. His pride had been bruised, and now he wanted everyone to agree she wasn't good enough for him. But it was too late to stop the wedding. The German ambassadors were already in England. Backing out now would insult Anne's brother and destroy the alliance Henry needed. So he went through with it, on the outside. On January 6th, 1540, Anne and Henry were married. But that night, nothing happened. Henry later claimed he couldn't perform his husbandly duties because he found her so unattractive. He told his doctors he was too disgusted to even try. Yet he also said strange things, like how her body was no maid's. The court, always eager to follow the king's lead, began whispering behind Anne's back. Some said she wasn't pure. Others cruelly suggested she might already be pregnant. Of course, that wasn't true. It was just gossip spread to make Anne look bad. But the rumor worked. People began whispering that Anne was hiding something, that maybe she wasn't pure, that maybe she tricked the king. Anne was confused. She thought the marriage was real. She tried hard to be a good wife. She dressed in English fashion, smiled at court, and kept trying to learn the language. She had no idea Henry was already looking at someone else, her own lady-in-waiting, a young girl named Catherine Howard. Anne was playing the role of queen, but the king had already moved on. He didn't try to know her. He didn't try to fix things. In his mind, their marriage was over before it began. And while Anne worked to adjust to her new life, Henry was quietly preparing to end it. She had married a king, but she had no idea her throne was already slipping away. By spring 1540, Henry was done pretending. He had no feelings for Anne. He didn't even try to hide it. At court, he avoided her. He spent more time with Catherine Howard, a girl barely 19. She laughed, danced, and flirted, everything Henry now wanted in a queen. Anne saw the coldness, but she didn't understand why. She tried harder. She smiled more. She dressed in softer colors. She even asked her ladies how to act more like English women. But nothing helped.
Henry had made up his mind. In June, his advisors came to Anne with news. The king wanted a divorce. But they didn't use the word divorce. They called it an annulment, as if the marriage had never truly happened. Anne was shocked. She had done nothing wrong. She had followed every rule, honored the king, and stayed faithful. But now he claimed the marriage was invalid, that it hadn't been properly consummated, that she had once been betrothed to another man as a child, and that made the union illegal. Anne could have fought back. She could have called for support from her brother in Cleves. She could have demanded a proper trial. But she didn't. She chose a different path, one that would save her life. Anne agreed to everything. She signed the annulment papers. She said the marriage had never been complete. She didn't argue, didn't complain. And in return, Henry gave her something no other wife of his ever got: freedom. He gave her money, £4,000 a year, a huge sum at the time. He gave her houses, land, and the title of the king's beloved sister. She would be respected, treated like royalty, and safe. Anne was no longer queen, but she had something even better. She had her life. She had her freedom, and she had no husband watching her every move. The marriage that began with a painting and ended with a rejection lasted only 6 months. It was one of the shortest royal marriages in English history. But Anne had done something no one else had. She survived Henry.
After the annulment, most people expected Anne to return to Germany in shame. She didn't. She chose to stay in England, a bold and surprising decision. But Anne was clever. She knew going back home meant she'd be seen as a failure, a woman who couldn't please her husband, a rejected bride. In England, she still had power. She had wealth, land, and royal respect. People bowed to her. She was treated kindly at court. And most importantly, Henry no longer saw her as a threat. Anne was free to live as she pleased. She moved into her new homes, including Richmond Palace. She wore what she liked, ate the food she enjoyed, and kept a small household of trusted servants. Her life was peaceful. She stayed close with Henry's children. Princess Mary, once distant, became her friend. Anne sent gifts to little Prince Edward and showed warmth to Princess Elizabeth, even though Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, had been executed by the same king. Anne stayed far from drama. When Henry married Catherine Howard just weeks after the annulment, Anne didn't protest. In fact, she sent them a wedding gift and a kind letter. People called her graceful. Some called her foolish. But Anne was neither. She was smart. By showing no jealousy, no anger, no pride, she protected herself. When Catherine Howard was executed just a year later, Anne stayed quiet. She didn't celebrate. She didn't speak badly of the young queen. She knew better. Anne had learned how to survive in Henry's world. She didn't need a crown to win. She already had everything she needed: comfort, safety, and freedom. Years passed. Henry married again, but Anne's life stayed steady. She read books, played music, and welcomed guests from all over Europe. She was kind, calm, and graceful. And she never said a single bad word about Henry. That choice kept her safe. When King Henry died in 1547, Anne was one of the mourners. Not as a grieving widow, but as a respected figure in royal society. She had outlived him and watched many rise and fall at his side. Now, the danger was gone. Under the reign of young King Edward, Anne kept her position and comfort. She stayed close with Princess Mary, and when Mary became queen, Anne was given a place of honor at her coronation. No other ex-wife of Henry had ever been treated like that.
Anne had no children of her own, but she cared deeply for Henry's children. She had shown them kindness and respect even when her own future was uncertain. She died in 1557, at age 41, likely from cancer. But she didn't die in exile. She didn't die in disgrace. She died in peace, in her own bed, in her own home. Anne was buried at Westminster Abbey, the resting place of kings and queens. Her grave reads, Anne of Cleves, Queen of England. Not ex-queen, not cast-off wife, simply Queen. She had worn the crown for only 6 months, but in the end she won something more powerful than any title, a life of her own choosing. Anne of Cleves turned a royal rejection into personal victory. She didn't fight the storm, she stepped around it, and in doing so, she saved herself. While others lost their heads for Henry's love, Anne kept hers, and much more.